You're listening to the really useful podcast. This is the Tech Podcast for Technophobes. Joining me this week is Ian Buckley. My name is Christian Cawley. We haven't spoken for a few episodes. Ian, how's things with you?
Good, yeah. A little bit hot currently. We're on the heat wave that I think the UK might have just had. So it's been consistently over 30 degrees in Germany for a couple of days. And as a Northern English person, I am suffering a bit. I'm not going to lie.
You have my sympathies. This week, we're going to be looking at a completely different topic to temperatures in different European cities. Basically, we're looking at easy online security tips and tricks, things that you can do that don't involve installing loads of expensive software and, just checking over your shoulder all the time. Just easy, simple, quote unquote, soft tips that you can carry out that make using a computer and using the internet safer and more secure. There is no need for you to get think, well, I can't do that because I can't afford X, Y, and Z, because you don't need to spend any money on any of these tips. There's no VPNs, there's no antivirus solutions, no firewalls, none of that, no hardware solutions. These are just habitual new habits that you can learn.
Mm-hmm.
Now, before we
Absolutely.
go into that, I think it's probably worth going into. You're listening to us. You're probably listening to the really useful podcast regularly, and there is perhaps, and I don't want to blow any trumpets here, but perhaps a little bit. You're probably listening to us for tips and tricks. So you must have a little bit of an idea that we know what we're talking about. But everyone at some point has been hacked, or has accidentally, I don't know, received an email from their dad that their dad didn't send, that had a worm in it called Celebration or Birthday or something like that, and you clicked it and you got lots of pretty firework graphics on your computer monitor, and then within a few hours the computer just stopped working very well whatsoever because it was a worm that your dad didn't send. That happened to me. What about you?
Absolutely, it happens to everybody. The one thing about this, going into this, and I was sort of excited to talk about this because the one thing that I think people do, not just about computers, but about life, is they think that these things that happen, they happen to other people. It would never happen to me. But the stories of people getting had by seemingly simple scams on their computers go from the very top to the very bottom. Engineers who work for government organizations who specialize in security have been got by exactly the same stuff that your grandma got by. That's a sentence for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because as Christian just said, as you just said it, this is it's context. Context is absolutely the most important thing, because if your dad sends you a link that says celebrate, like you said, you're likely to open it because it's a nice email from your dad. For some of us, even more likely, depending on how tech savvy your parents are or aren't, is that you'll get an email or a message from maybe an old friend who you haven't heard from in a while. And you kind of think, oh, that's nice. They're kind of reaching out over Facebook. And the one that got me was a long while after I'd left home. I hadn't heard from people for a while. An old friend from home who I hadn't spoke to in a while sent me a Facebook message saying, your mum wanted me to send you this. Now I should have clocked it because that said your mother, and none of my mates from home had ever said mother. But you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
That seems so obvious, and it's kind of, oh yeah, my mum isn't on Facebook. She probably just asked someone to send it, and I clicked it, and a very lengthy decontamination of my computer came after that.
Oh dear.
It's anyone can fall for it. So the last thing you should do is think, I'm going to give this episode a skip because it could never happen to me.
Yeah, definitely. So we're going to look at a few things. We're going to look at how to spot a phishing email, how to check if links are safe, and using special websites, and also ways to make your password more secure. And we'll probably drift around those topics and a few others throughout the show. Spotting a phishing email. We get so much spam in our mailboxes these days, and hopefully if you're using a service and there are privacy and advertising complications with using, say, Outlook or Gmail or whatever, if you're using a provider that like banks on you clicking on stuff, it kind of doubles the risk if having advert emails at the top and then another email coming that looks like it might be just another advert but it's actually a phishing email. But they usually come from companies that you would have accounts with, which makes it more difficult. So like Amazon, PayPal, your bank, they phishing emails will look like those. They clone graphics. They take this style, the visual style of the official emails, replicate it, clone it, quote unquote, in order to fool you into clicking the link in the phishing email. Dare I ask, Ian, have you ever been caught by a phishing email?
Phishing email. I can't remember. I don't want to just say blanket no, because I've been using the internet since I was a teenager, and I've had an email address since I was a teenager, and I can't be sure that my old Hotmail account back in the day that I used to connect to MSN Messenger and speak to my school friends, I can't be sure that I didn't get caught by something back then, but not in memory.
Yeah.
There's been times though, even in recent years, when I've come close.
Yeah.
Because as I'm sure we're about to go into, one of the ways that these emails design themselves to look legitimate is by using branding and using branded logos and using the aesthetics of companies that you do trust to try and impersonate them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, you can click on the link, get taken to the website, and then you get asked to log in with your username and password, and all of a sudden, it's not the real site. It's a clone spoofed site. That username and password is then added to a database that the hackers, spoofers, spammers, whatever you want to call them, they've got your credentials for logging into the legitimate website. Now, things like one-time passwords and Google Authenticator app codes and things like that for two-factor authentication, they can help keep you safe and protected from phishing. But those are things that you should be using anyway. And they're not things that you should rely on as a last gasp to stay secure. They should be part of your normal staying secure regime. So I guess that's our first tip, really, is to use an authenticator app or use two-factor authentication. Spotting a phishing email can be difficult. If you notice, I'm pretty sure I've been caught by a couple of phishing emails quite some time ago. What alerted me to the fact that these weren't legitimate emails was that in those days, the websites that they took you to weren't as elaborate or authentic looking as they are these days. And it was like a clear warning sign that actually I'd been led up the garden path, and that was not a legitimate email. These days, it's a lot more difficult to check these things. Spotting a phishing email really is a case of looking at the way the email is written. Official emails will not go out, in 99% of the cases, will not go out with typing errors, spelling errors, bad formatting. So if there is a spelling mistake, a grammatical mistake, a missing apostrophe, anything like that, then it's a good clue that it's not legitimate. Most websites, PayPal, Amazon, whatever, they won't send you an email with a login link in it. They'll suggest you go and just visit the website. And if you're a user of that website, if you have an account already, then you just go to your browser and visit the website. And the sender's address is always a giveaway because they're never the legitimate domain. So that's also another good clue as to whether that is a phishing email or not. Now, there are various tools you can use to block phishing emails that you might pay for. Some are free. If you're using a web-based email, then you can highlight it as, you can alert Gmail or Outlook or whoever that it is a junk email. So that's always a good tip to use as well, because then that helps other people. Now, if you take a look in your spam folder, you will find a hell of a lot of emails. Again, if you're using Gmail or I was going to say Hotmail then, because I still actually have a Hotmail account, or Hotmail, Outlook, whatever. In the spam accounts there, you'll find a ton of junk, and most of these are spam and phishing emails. So they're already doing a good job of keeping you safe and secure from those. But, I mean, if there is any doubt, then this is the time where I think the key aspect of this week's really useful podcast comes in, which is the sites that let you check if a link is safe. Ian.
Yes.
Have you ever gone to click on a link on a website, not so much on in an email, in a phishing email, but on a website, and you just clicked it and found yourself in some sort of internet hell?
Absolutely. It seems less these days than it used to be. It seems like these things happen less than it used to be. But I certainly have had times when I've clicked a link and it has opened a page which has opened up 50 different sub pages,
Yeah.
and you're not sure what you're trying to get back to, and you're not sure where you've headed to. And many of these pages are very difficult to close, and you can't go back. And yeah, this is a very typical thing that partially it's done for advertising, and so as much as it's annoying, partially these windows that open up are a million adverts, and that advert money obviously trickles back to whoever made the sites. And those things in them of themselves aren't necessarily dangerous, but what you want to be careful of is if you click on a link and expect to get somewhere, you're going to enter some personal details, and it redirects you to somewhere that you do not want to be. But yes, in short, I've definitely had that happen to me a bunch of times.
Yeah. I when you just said that 50 cascading adverts popping under or popping over, whatever, just had a flashback to the days of and don't try this at home, visiting Wares sites long time ago in the Wild West days of the internet, when it seemed okay to do things like that when really it wasn't. And
Absolutely,
yeah, that would happen quite regularly. And I've just googled Wares sites because I kind of forgot that they'd existed over the past sort of 10. I mean, I've never been anywhere near one in about 10, 15 years. And yet apparently they do still exist.
Mm.
So that's, gosh, that was a surprise. I kind of thought they'd be dead and gone or buried in the depths of the dark web.
Yeah, for sure. But no, the whole Wares culture is still going strong. It's just obviously the games had to change somewhat, I believe. But again, this is exactly the same situation I was in. Is that as a young and possibly very naive, well, definitely very naive person, I was under the false pretense that there was piracy and then there was Wares, and I was just of the right generation where. It sounds really ridiculous, but I was just at the right generation where I understood why it was bad to buy bootleg DVDs off the man at the market, but didn't quite understand why it was an issue to download albums online. And I know, given given a few years of growing up and also a few years of the world changing, that must sound utterly ridiculous. But I really wasn't alone. I was of that generation where the internet did seem like this big free playground, and that you were able to do stuff without getting in trouble.
Yeah.
But the very same people who also saw that there were, a large number of people like me who I would admit was at the time not the most tech savvy. I was on the internet a lot and I was learning about it, but I certainly didn't have the knowledge that I accumulated over years of use and writing about computers. Yeah, there's a lot of people that realized that if I was clicking on random links to try and get free software, they could insert whatever they wanted into that to try and make it unsecure and to do the early attempts at phishing scams.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it's not just that scenario where you need to be aware of the links that you're clicking. These days, I mean, there are modern equivalents, I suppose, of websites throwing you sort of links that you might not want to click, but actually end up clicking. There's those sites where you get something up on Google News that looks an interesting article, or on Facebook or whatever, and then at the bottom there's, remember Jennifer Aniston? See what she looks like now, and all that stuff.
Fake adverts.
Yeah, those things as well. So, sites that let you check if a link is safe, Ian.
Yes.
What have we got?
Well, I'll full hands up and just say, when we were talking about recording this episode, you mentioned there were sites that help you check links, and my immediate reaction is there? That would be very handy. It's never even occurred to me that there'd be sites that do this, and so I did a bit of reading up before this, and there are, and it's a really useful thing to have, because essentially, there's various websites you can go to that will let you check URLs, and the first one is a fairly trusted name as well. We have Norton, who are, as if you know anything about computer security, you probably know about Norton. You might have a Norton virus checker installed on your computer. It may have come with your computer even. They have an extension for Chrome, which will allow you to post any link in it, and will let you check if it's legit or not. And as well as it being an extension, you can just go to their website. It's part of the Norton website is just a place you can enter any any website address. Sorry. I will note, if you are going to do that, be very careful to right-click and copy an email, a website address, rather than actually click the link, because you'll just end up going there anyway. But yes, you can check them on Norton Web, and I know there are a number of others. But having done a little bit of reading up on it, that was certainly a bit of a revelation to me, actually.
Yeah, there's there are a few. There's a Scan URL, Fish Tank, Google Transparency Report, which is another reliable one. I mean, they're all
Hmm.
reliable, but with a reliable name. There's
Hmm.
Virus Total Safe, PSafe Defender Lab,
Hmm.
Defender being DFNDR, obviously kind of a Leonard Skinner take on the word defender. And there's URL Void as well. Now, all of these you will find in an article called 7 Quick Sites that let you check if a link is safe and make use of. And that link and everything else we talk about in this week's really useful podcast, you'll find in the show notes. Now, it was actually myself, and I who compiled this list
Yes.
the last time. These have all been checked as of May 2011, so you should find them all reliable. Some of them share information, and which is obviously an advantage because it means that you can guarantee that they more or less work. They also, some of them take user submitted information and user submitted links for further assistance. So,
Yeah.
which they then look into in more detail and confirm or deny whether they're good. So that's also useful to know as well. I would recommend that you check that out. If you're concerned about a link, then they are the places to go to. It's worth, I think, just clarifying one thing here. Links can be full domain names, such as www.makeuseof.com, or they can be shortened URLs, such as the example in the article says, goo.gl v47vrx, so in various different cases. There's various link shortening tools out there, and while they're useful because for things such as Twitter or for text messages by reducing the number of characters used for a link, when like some internet links can be the length of a if you wrote them down, they could run to the length of a page of paper.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so shortened URLs are really useful, but they can be used by I was going to say malevolent, but that puts me in mind of sort of the Empire in Star Wars. So, like, let's say malicious actors to hide destinations that you actually don't want to go to. So, it's worth knowing what shortened URLs are, what they're hiding, that they can be unpacked. And link checkers can unpack those shortened URLs for you to show you the true destination. So,
Absolutely, yeah. It goes a little further than that, even. I mean, it's harder to do these days, but there was a time when browsers were a little bit less secure, where it was equally possible to take a full-length looking link and have it appear to be the correct link. And when you clicked it, it would automatically send you to a different link. So even if a link isn't shortened, it isn't worth. It's worth being wary as to where you were clicking that link. I always find a good thing to follow is that if someone is sending you saying, okay, follow this link to go to the product, I don't know, the product page of your bank, just go to your own bank's website the way you normally would and go to the products page. You don't need a link to take you there.
Sure.
Products is a weird one. Just a quick note, just because a couple of eagle-eared listeners out there might be getting a bit pedantic about it. This article wasn't checked in 2011. It was checked in May 11th, 2021. Yeah, it was just like slip of the tongue there, Christian.
Did I? Okay.
So as of 2011, these links are legit, and I should hope so. the full decade.
I mean, it's entirely plausible as I was contributing to make use of in May 2011.
No, absolutely, yeah. It's all highly possible.
Yeah.
I have to say, I do really like the idea of the Empire using phishing scams. Just the Emperor sitting down and just sending a link to Luke Skywalker. Father's identity, please click here. Completely different set of films where the dark side won.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they had to raise the money for all that military hardware somehow, didn't they? So.
Oh, absolutely. The Death Star's all paid for by dodgy Russian adverts. Everyone knows
that. Got to be. Scamming members of the Republic. Yeah, definitely. Yes. And we'll take a moment from our usual podcast proceedings to just remind you that the Really Useful Podcast can be found pretty much anywhere you find podcasts. So we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on Spotify, we're on Google Podcasts. We're hosted at transistor.fm, so you can find us there as well. We're also on YouTube and, of course, on makeuseof.com. Now, however you subscribe to the Really Useful Podcast and listen to us, it would be amazing if you could take a moment to leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. That will help us to find new listeners and take our podcast to ever greater heights. You'll find the link to our Apple Podcast page in the show notes. Thanks a lot. Yeah, let's move on. Because we are looking at soft tips and avoiding particular websites, such as Where sites, which, you're not going to Google that because it's a rabbit hole of illegality that you don't want to go anywhere near. But then also, like checking things safely, also another soft, easy security tip that can save you a lot of bother later on, not clicking emails from your dad that say celebration.exe. Again,
yes,
not something you should do. Another good soft tip. But ultimately, the biggest soft tip is probably, and it's not quite what we're going to talk about next in detail, but the main soft tip really is when, and this comes in whether you're at home or you're at work, is if you're stepping away from your computer, either turn it off or lock the screen. You would not believe the number of people that I have come across over the years working in sort of like hot desking environments, in office environments, in cafes, using their computers. It'll just go away from their computer and not lock their screen.
Yeah,
that is just it blows my mind how that does not occur to them to be quite a serious lapse of security. And part of that, I mean, like on Windows, you can lock your screen by pressing the Windows button and the L button. It's locked. If you're using an iPad or an Android tablet, you can just press the power button to turn the screen off, and then it's locked. Assuming, of course, that you've got security set up for a login password, and you pretty much should do these days. I think it's part of the entire setup procedure. But once that's out of the way, having a secure password is really, really important. Now, before we go further along this line, it's quite convenient actually that I got that date wrong earlier, because before I worked for Make Use Of, I worked for a software company in software support, and prior to that I worked in the UK's NHS in IT, and a lot of that work was passwords and security. There was a large number of people whose password, and we're going back a bit, we're going back sort of 15 years or so, but it's kind of still the case now where people don't have secure passwords. People in positions where they were facing patients, secretaries, administrators, those types of people, were operating with very easy to guess passwords. Clinicians who were taking patients into their offices, into their that's not the right word, is it? Clinics, special rooms, again using very non-secure passwords. And it is a work environment, and there is a need to get on with things, and having an easy to remember password for you might seem like the best option, but holistically speaking, it's a really poor idea to have an easy to remember password. Now, recent research has shown that millions use their pets' names as passwords because they're easy to remember, but that's not particularly safe because that information could be picked up from a social network. But there are ways to use the same name in a secure way, aren't there, Ian?
Absolutely. So one thing that is worth saying just before we go on is that everything that comes to this talk about passwords hangs on the last point that was made, which is that if you leave your computer open, unlocked in a public space, none of this is going to help you at the end of the day, really. Because unless you type your password in cold every single time and use no password managers or all that kind of stuff, then everything you do is going to be easily bypassable. But you can actually, if you want to, for example, use your pet's name for a password, there are ways that you can make it a little bit easier. So let's say you have a pet's name which is Charlie, for example. Your dog's called Charlie or whatever, and you want to use that. If you just have Charlie as your password, it's going to be fairly easy to guess. But if you, for example, think to yourself, all right, well, what if a few of those letters are uppercase and a few of them are lowercase? That might be a little bit harder for someone to guess. What if you change one of the letters to a number that looks sort of similar? I mean, in some internet speak, people change E's for 4s and all that kind of stuff. and adding some punctuation and a couple of numbers very quickly, just a couple of little changes. So instead of it just being Charlie, it's like, say, exclamation mark, small c, capital H, A, R, capital L, I, 4, and then a question mark at the end. That is an order of magnitude harder for someone to crack with a password cracker, or just guess in general, than just your pet's name. I would argue, as someone who's not paranoid, but just a little bit, I don't know, maybe I'm maybe I am a little bit paranoid, having written about things like this for years, but I wouldn't even necessarily bother with that. There are ways you can get around personal information being used as passwords and turned into mnemonics and all that kind of stuff. But I personally think that password generators and services that will save passwords, and I say services, this isn't something you have to pay for. Google Chrome will do it for you. I tend to find that a far better idea than actually making your own password from your pet's name. But that's just my personal opinion, of course.
I use a kind of combination of several techniques. I use a password manager. I've recently moved from LastPass because they turned evil. And if you don't know, they started limiting how many devices you could use it on unless you're using paying for the privilege, which is fine.
Yeah.
I have no problem with the free market, but it's not a service I want to pay for when I've been getting it for free previously. So I've gone to the open source tool KeePass, which I'm finding an adequate replacement. Not quite as integrated and streamlined and effortless to use, but nonetheless, it's free and it's open source. So there's that aspect to it, which is pleasing. And it works with pretty much everything. And there are versions that integrate on different platforms. So that's good for me. So I do use a password manager. I also use various combinations. I've used some of the techniques that Ian's just described for my passwords, but I also use nonsense phrases that I can remember.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'd love to share them with you because they are just meaninglessly silly and in some cases quite rude. But I'm not going to because obviously,
obviously they're your password. You don't really want to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, I mean, there's an example here, just to reiterate what Ian said. There's an example in the article. Baggins the Ginger Ninja becomes B at GG1NS, capital THE, capital G1NGER, capital N1NJ at symbol again. And I mean, as long as these were working, these are really secure, but there is a shortcoming. Some, and I say some websites, most of them are on board with unusual password formats, but there are some websites still out there that may take offense at the length of the password or some of the characters. So you may have to be a little more flexible with some of the things that you put in there. But generally speaking, these are good tips. And again, you'll find them in the show notes.
Absolutely.
We have discussed various soft security tips, locking your computer, how to spot phishing email, using your pet's name, or Pat, if you know a Pat, use their name. As to, if you've got a different name for them, if you've got a pet name for Pat, to make your password more secure, and link checkers. Really, I think that's generally it. But there is one other thing which we didn't kind of discuss prior to organising this podcast, which has just occurred to me. Oversharing on social networks can be, and not just oversharing, but overfriending as well. That's kind of an easy to avoid thing, isn't it? That could make your life a lot more secure.
Absolutely. And in fact, the one thing going into this podcast that I thought that would, if there was one thing I would want people to take away, at least from my part in this podcast, it would be that these days, both me and Christian have been on the internet and writing about it for quite some time. So yeah, we're talking about getting email scams and all this kind of stuff. But these days, you are absolutely 100% more likely to get scammed on a social network by someone you know or you know vaguely, and more often than not by someone who maybe you have some interest in. Because you have a link sent through and you want to see this thing now because it's maybe you feel a little bit socially pressured to be in on things or whatever. I would argue that the two things that you should always bear in mind, no matter what social network we're talking about, this is true for Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everything, is that if someone is asking to be friends with you, check if they are friends with you and let them be your friend only if you know them. If you don't want to do that and you do want to add people, do bear in mind that if you friend somebody, then maybe they will be able to start messaging you and you have no idea who they really are. And the second and probably the most important thing is, if anybody sends you a link on social media for any reason, it's always worth just firing a quick message back saying like, hey, did you mean to send that link? Or putting it into a link checker or something like that before just instantly clicking on something, because the amount of time people are sent through a thing that just says, hey, I just found this, it's amazing. And then you click on the link and it asks you to enter your email address. And these days, a bunch of sites want you to sign in.
Yeah.
Before you know it, you're done.
Yeah.
So a general rule is, unless you know for sure that you're expecting something, you don't need to necessarily open everything immediately. I think I can't say it any clearer than that. Just be very careful what you open on social media, because these days that's how they are getting people 100%.
I think that brings us to the end of this week's really useful podcast. Great tip from Ian at the end there. We'd like to thank you for listening. You've been listening to the really useful podcast from makeuseof.com. It's goodbye from us.